The lecture hall buzzed with nervous energy as first-year students shuffled into their seats. The Galactic Military Academy's Orientation Day always brought together the finest young minds from across the galaxy's 47 member species. Towering Zephyrians with their crystalline skin sat next to the fox-like Volnari, while the insectoid Thrak clicked their mandibles in quiet conversation. Sarah Chen slipped into a seat near the back, her worn backpack clutching a few basic supplies. Unlike her classmates who arrived in family shuttles with ceremonial send-offs, she had taken 3 different transport ships just to reach the academy station. Her simple clothes stood out among the elaborate traditional garments and expensive casual wear of her peers. Professor Kelvak, a distinguished Altarian with purple-scaled skin and 4 arms, stepped to the podium. His reputation preceded him as one of the galaxy's foremost military strategists. Students straightened in their seats knowing that his tactical analysis course would make or break their military careers. "Welcome to Strategic Combat Analysis," Professor Kelvak announced, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "This course will challenge everything you think you know about warfare, leadership, and survival. Many of you come from military families. Others have studied at the finest preparatory academies. Some have even seen minor conflicts." Sarah listened quietly, making notes on an old data pad that flickered occasionally. Around her, students whispered about their impressive backgrounds. The Zephyrian next to her, Crystalline Vex, mentioned commanding a planetary defense fleet during a pirate raid. A young Volnari spoke of graduating top of his class from the prestigious Kepler War College. "Before we begin," Professor Kelvak continued, "I want to understand what experience you bring to this classroom. When I call your name, stand and briefly state your background." The roll call began alphabetically by species, then by surname within each group. Each student rose with confidence, reciting impressive credentials. Military Academy honors, family military traditions spanning generations, tactical simulation championships, and real combat experience filled the air. Altarian sector, Zexhai Korthon. A young Altarian stood proudly. Second-generation military family. Graduated summa cum laude from Altarian Command School. Led successful relief operations during the Kepler Nebula crisis. Professor Kelvak nodded approvingly and made notes on his tablet. Human sector, Sarah Chen. Sarah stood slowly, feeling dozens of eyes turned toward her. The room fell unusually quiet. She cleared her throat softly. "No formal military background, sir, just interested in learning." A few students exchanged glances. Some smirked at what seemed like an obvious misplacement. How had someone with no credentials made it into the galaxy's most competitive military academy? The admission standards were legendary. Planetary governments fought for a single nomination slot. Professor Kelvak's 4 eyes studied Sarah for a moment longer than the others. Something flickered across his expression, but he simply nodded and continued the roll call. The Thrak student after her, Kliktar Hives, stood with obvious pride. Third-generation Hive commander, successfully defended 17 contested systems, recognized by the Galactic Defense Council for innovative swarm tactics. As the roll call continued, Sarah noticed several students whispering and pointing in her direction. She tried to focus on her notes, but the feeling of being an outsider pressed down on her shoulders. Everyone here belonged except her, or so it seemed. When Professor Kelvak finished the roll call, he launched into his first lecture about the fundamental principles of galactic warfare. Sarah absorbed every word, her old data pad working overtime to capture the information, while other students relied on expensive neural interfaces that recorded directly to their enhanced memory banks. She wrote notes the old-fashioned way. "Warfare in space requires thinking in 3 dimensions," Professor Kelvak explained, projecting a holographic battle scenario above the class. "But more importantly, it requires understanding that every species brings unique advantages and disadvantages to combat." The hologram showed a complex battle between multiple fleets. Sarah watched intently as formations wheeled through space, using asteroid fields and gravitational forces as tactical elements. Her mind automatically began calculating firing solutions and identifying tactical weaknesses in each fleet's approach. "Can anyone identify the critical error in the Zephyrian fleet's positioning?" Professor Kelvak asked. Several hands shot up immediately. He called on Crystalline Vex, who confidently explained a minor issue with power distribution that would reduce shield effectiveness by 12%. "Acceptable answer," Professor Kelvak acknowledged. "Anyone else notice something more fundamental?" Sarah's hand went up slowly. Professor Kelvac's 4 eyes fixed on her with interest. Miss Chen? They're treating space like an ocean, Sarah said quietly. Their formation assumes threats will come from a single plane like naval warfare. But the asteroid field creates natural 3-dimensional choke points. If an enemy approached from below their formation, using the asteroid's gravitational shadows to mask their approach, they could eliminate the entire command structure before the fleet could reorient. The classroom fell silent. Professor Kelvac's expression shifted to one of genuine surprise. The battle scenario wasn't designed to test basic tactical knowledge. It was a historical recreation of an actual battle where exactly that strategy had been used to devastating effect. That is, precisely what happened in the Battle of Meridian 7, Professor Kelvac said slowly. A human tactical innovation that revolutionized 3-dimensional combat doctrine. Sarah felt the weight of stares from around the room. Several students who had been dismissive now looked at her with curiosity, rather than condescension. Crystal and Vex turned in her seat to study Sarah more carefully. How did you identify that strategy, Miss Chen? Professor Kelvac asked. It's not covered in standard military history texts. Sarah hesitated. I read about it somewhere. Just seemed logical. Professor Kelvac made more notes on his tablet, his 4 hands moving rapidly. Class dismissed. Miss Chen, please remain behind. As students filed out, many cast backward glances at Sarah. Some looked confused, others intrigued. A few seemed almost suspicious. How had someone with no military background identified an advanced tactical concept that many of them, with their years of formal training, had missed entirely? Sarah packed her flickering datapad slowly, waiting for the room to empty. Professor Kelvac approached her desk, his expression thoughtful. Miss Chen, he said quietly, your answer today was remarkably insightful. Tell me, what exactly is your background? The Academy's admission records show you applied directly through the open examination system, with no sponsoring government or military recommendation. Sarah met his gaze steadily. I'm just a student who wants to learn, Professor. Nothing more. Professor Kelvac studied her for a long moment. Something in her posture, her calm confidence despite being clearly out of place, made him wonder if there was more to Sarah Chen than appeared on the surface. In his 40 years of teaching, he had learned to recognize when students were hiding something. Very well, he said finally. I look forward to seeing what other insights you might offer. As Sarah left the lecture hall, she didn't notice Professor Kelvac immediately opening a secure communication channel on his tablet. Some questions deserved investigation, especially when they involved students who demonstrated impossible knowledge with perfectly ordinary backgrounds. The Academy's Training Simulation Center hummed with activity as students prepared for their first practical exercise. Advanced holographic systems could recreate any battlefield scenario with perfect accuracy, testing tactical decision-making under pressure. Sarah stood with her assigned team in the preparation area, still feeling like an outsider among her more experienced classmates. All right, team, announced Crystalline Vex, their self-appointed leader. This is a standard fleet engagement scenario. I'll take command position. Kliktar will handle point defense coordination, and Thyvan can manage logistics. The tall Zephyrian gestured toward Sarah almost as an afterthought. Chen, you can observe and learn. Sarah nodded without protest, though she noticed the subtle dismissal. Her teammates had already decided she would be dead weight based on her lack of credentials. She couldn't blame them entirely. On paper, she had no business being here. The simulation chamber materialized around them, creating the bridge of a Galactic Defense Force cruiser. Through the main view screen, a hostile fleet approached through an asteroid field. The scenario parameters appeared on side displays. Protect a civilian evacuation convoy while outnumbered 3-1. Standard defensive formation, Vex commanded, settling into the captain's chair. All power to forward shields. We'll buy time for the evacuation ships. Sarah watched the tactical display carefully as their opponents closed distance. The enemy fleet moved with textbook precision, but something about their formation nagged at her. She pulled up additional sensor data on a side console, studying energy signatures and movement patterns. Enemy vessels are maintaining perfect spacing, Kliktar reported. Their coordination suggests drone ships or heavily networked command systems. Good intel, Vex acknowledged. Maintain current course. Focus fire on their lead destroyer. The battle began with thunderous exchanges of energy weapons. Their ship shuddered under enemy fire while their own weapons carved chunks from hostile vessels. The evacuation convoy crawled toward the jump point, desperately slow under the protection of their single cruiser. Sarah continued analyzing the enemy formation data. Something was definitely wrong. Perfect coordination like this typically meant either artificial intelligence control or something else. She pulled up spectral analysis of the enemy weapon signatures. "Crystalline," Sarah said quietly. "Can you bring up the metallurgy scans of their hulls?" "We're in the middle of a firefight, Chen," Vex replied tersely. "Whatever you're thinking can wait." On the main display, 2 more enemy ships broke through their defensive line. The evacuation convoy was still 40 minutes from minimum safe jump distance. At their current rate of loss, they would be destroyed within 20 minutes. Sarah studied the incoming data streams more intently. The enemy ship's energy signatures were wrong for their apparent size. The hull compositions showed unusual alloy distributions. Most telling, their movement patterns were too fluid for crude vessels but too creative for standard AI. "They're not real ships," Sarah said suddenly. "What?" Vex spun in the command chair to face her. "The enemy fleet. They're holograms. Extremely sophisticated ones, but still projections." Sarah moved to the tactical console, her fingers flying over the controls. "Look at the power distribution patterns. The weapons fire is real, but it's coming from hidden generators in the asteroid field, not from the ships themselves." Thyvan, the quiet Altarian logistics officer, pulled up Sarah's data on his screen. "She's right. The mass readings are inconsistent with visual size estimates." "That's impossible," Clicktar chittered. "The simulation systems don't use deception protocols in basic scenarios." "This isn't a basic scenario," Sarah realized, her excitement growing. "This is an advanced psychological warfare test disguised as fleet combat. The real enemy is using holographic projections to make us think we're outnumbered. The actual threat is much smaller." She transferred her analysis to the main display. Highlighted in her breakdown were the true locations of the weapon platforms hidden among the asteroids. Instead of 30 ships, they faced perhaps 8 real threats. "If we ignore the false targets and strike the actual platforms," Sarah began. "We'd cut through their real firepower in minutes," Vex finished, understanding dawning in her crystalline features. "But how did you figure this out so quickly?" Sarah hesitated. The truth was that she had seen similar deception tactics before, in situations she couldn't discuss. "Lucky guess?" Vex stared at her for a moment, then nodded sharply. "Thyvan, reroute all power to sensors and targeting systems. Clicktar, prepare precision strikes on Sarah's coordinates. All hands, ignore the pretty light show and focus on the real targets." The tide of battle shifted dramatically. Instead of desperately fighting for survival against overwhelming odds, they systematically eliminated the hidden weapon platforms. The holographic enemy fleet continued its impressive display, but without real firepower behind it. The projections were merely an elaborate magic show. Within 8 minutes, the last real threat was neutralized. The evacuation convoy reached safe jump distance with minimal casualties. The simulation ended with their team achieving the highest possible success rating. "Outstanding performance." Professor Kelvac's voice echoed through the chamber as the holographic battlefield dissolved. Team 7 identified the true nature of the scenario in record time. As they filed out of the simulation chamber, Sarah found herself surrounded by curious classmates. Word of their unusual victory had spread quickly through the other teams, most of whom had failed the scenario entirely. "How did you know it was a deception?" asked Thyvan. "I've been studying holographic warfare for 3 years and missed all the signs you spotted." "Just seemed too convenient," Sarah replied. "Perfect formations, textbook tactics, overwhelming numbers. Real warfare is messier." Crystalline Vex studied Sarah with new respect. "You've seen real warfare, haven't you?" "Despite what you said during roll call." Sarah met her gaze steadily. "I've read about it, extensively." Later that evening in the student quarters, Sarah sat alone in her small room, updating her personal files on the Academy's network. Her fingers paused over the communication console. A secure message indicator blinked in the corner of her screen. She opened the message, recognizing the encryption signature immediately. The text was brief and unsigned. "Maintain cover. Situation developing faster than anticipated. New intelligence suggests Academy infiltration possible. Trust no one. Command." Sarah deleted the message and leaned back in her chair. Maintaining her cover as an ordinary student was becoming more difficult. Her tactical knowledge kept slipping through despite her best efforts to appear naive. Worse, Professor Kelvac's suspicious look suggested he was already investigating her background. The mission briefing had seemed straightforward when she accepted it 6 months ago. Enroll in the Galactic Military Academy under deep cover, monitor for signs of enemy infiltration, and report back. Intelligence suggested that hostile forces might be placing agents in key military training positions to identify and eliminate future leaders before they became threats. What the briefing hadn't mentioned was how hard it would be to pretend ignorance when she saw her classmates making potentially fatal tactical errors. Her instincts as a trained operative warred constantly with her need to maintain her civilian cover identity. A soft chime indicated someone at her door. Sarah quickly closed her files and opened the door to find crystalline Vex standing in the corridor. "Mind if I come in?" Vex asked. "I wanted to talk about today's simulation." Sarah stepped aside to let her enter. Vex moved to the window, looking out at the starfield beyond the station. "You know," Vex said quietly, "my family has been military for 12 generations. I've been studying tactics since I could walk. But today you saw things that I completely missed." "Beginner's luck," Sarah offered. Vex turned to face her, crystalline features reflecting the room's soft lighting. "I don't think so. I think you're not who you claim to be, Sarah Chen. The question is whether that makes you friend or enemy." Sarah felt her hand instinctively move toward where she would normally carry a weapon, then forced herself to relax. "I'm just a student, Crystalline. Nothing more complicated than that." "Maybe," Vex said, moving toward the door. "But if you ever decide to trust someone with whatever secret you're carrying, I hope you'll consider me. Good soldiers watch each other's backs." After Vex left, Sarah sealed her door and activated privacy screens. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to blow her cover accidentally. She was walking a tightrope between maintaining her mission and protecting her new classmates from threats they couldn't yet see. In the distance, a transport ship docked with the Academy station. Sarah watched it through her window, wondering if it carried supplies, new students, or something more dangerous. Her secure briefings had been clear about one thing: enemy agents were definitely coming to the Academy. The only question was whether they had already arrived. Sarah's first month at the Academy passed in a careful balance of exceptional performance and deliberate restraint. She learned to hold back just enough to avoid suspicion while still contributing meaningfully to her team exercises. Her classmates had begun accepting her as the group's unofficial tactical advisor, despite her supposed lack of experience. The morning alarm echoed through the dormitory sections as students prepared for Advanced Combat Scenarios class. Sarah dressed quickly in the standard Academy uniform, checking her appearance in the mirror. The ordinary reflection staring back gave no hint of the specialized training hidden beneath her civilian cover. In the corridor, she encountered Thyvan hurrying toward the lift with an armload of data tablets. The young Altarian had become something of a friend, one of the few classmates who seemed genuinely interested in her insights rather than suspicious of them. "Sarah, perfect timing," Thyvan called out. "Have you seen the new scenario parameters? Professor Kelvac has us running boarding action simulations today." Sarah felt a chill of apprehension. Close-quarters combat scenarios would test skills she definitely possessed, but couldn't afford to demonstrate. "Boarding actions? That seems advanced for first-year students." That's what everyone is saying. Apparently the Academy received new intelligence about changing warfare patterns. "They're accelerating certain aspects of our training." Thyvan lowered his voice as they entered the lift. "There are rumors about increased hostile activity in several border sectors." The lift carried them toward the simulation decks, but Sarah's mind was already racing through implications. Accelerated training programs usually meant the Academy expected to need graduates sooner than planned. Combined with her ongoing mission to identify potential infiltrators, the timeline suggested brewing conflicts might be closer than anyone publicly admitted. The Advanced Combat Scenarios classroom buzzed with nervous energy. Boarding actions were considered among the most dangerous forms of space warfare, requiring split-second decisions in confined spaces where a single mistake could depressurize entire ship sections. Professor Kelvac entered with his usual measured stride, but Sarah noticed subtle tension in his posture. His forearms moved with slightly more precision than normal, and his eyes scanned the classroom as if evaluating each student for something beyond academic performance. Today we explore close-quarters combat in zero-gravity environments, Professor Kelvac announced. Boarding actions represent warfare at its most personal and deadly. Success requires not just tactical knowledge, but instant adaptation to changing conditions. He activated the room's holographic systems, projecting a three-dimensional cutaway view of a large cargo vessel. Your mission: board this merchant ship, neutralize hostile forces, and secure the civilian crew. Intelligence indicates the vessel has been captured by Corvan raiders. Sarah studied the ship layout automatically, identifying potential choke points, security weaknesses, and optimal approach vectors. The design was familiar from her previous training, though she couldn't admit that to her classmates. Teams of 4, Professor Kelvac continued. Jen, you're with Vex, Thyvan, and our newest student, Marcus Webb. Sarah looked around for the unfamiliar name and spotted a human male she didn't recognize. Webb appeared to be in his early 20s, with short-cropped brown hair and the kind of compact build that suggested military training. Strange that she hadn't noticed him before. As teams assembled, Sarah approached the new student. Marcus Webb? I don't think we've met. Webb extended his hand with a practiced smile. Just transferred in from the Outer Rim Academy. Administrative delays kept me from starting with everyone else. Something about his handshake felt wrong. The grip was too precise, too controlled. Sarah's trained instincts recognized the careful pressure of someone accustomed to concealing their true strength. What's your background? She asked casually. Colonial security forces. Nothing too exciting. Spent most of my time chasing smugglers through asteroid fields. Webb's answer came smoothly, but his eyes didn't quite match his casual tone. Crystal and Vex joined them, studying Webb with her typical directness. Another human with mysterious credentials. This team is becoming interesting. The simulation began with their team materializing in a maintenance pod attached to the cargo ship's hull. Through the transparent aluminum viewport, they could see the massive vessel stretching away into space. Their mission clock showed 45 minutes to complete objectives before simulated reinforcements would arrive. Standard breach protocol, Vex commanded, taking charge of the team. Webb, you're on point. Sarah, tactical analysis. Thyvan, watch our backs and manage communications. They cut through the hull using plasma torches, the simulation perfectly recreating the challenges of working in zero gravity while wearing combat suits. As they entered the ship's cargo bay, emergency lighting cast eerie shadows between towering containers. Webb moved with fluid precision, checking corners and clearances with practiced efficiency. Sarah watched him carefully while conducting her own tactical assessment. His movements were too smooth for someone with only colonial security experience. This was military training, probably special operations level. Motion sensors detect 12 hostiles spread throughout the ship, Thyvan reported. 6 on this level, 3 on the crew deck, 3 more guarding the bridge. The civilians? Vex asked. Engineering section, lower deck, sealed behind blast doors. Sarah pulled up the ship's layout on her suit display, studying the hostile positions. The raiders are using standard defensive positions, but they've left the ventilation system unguarded. If we can access the maintenance shafts... Too risky, Webb interrupted. Crawling through vents leaves us vulnerable if they detect our movement. Better to advance through main corridors with proper cover. Vex looked between them. 2 different approaches. Sarah, what's your reasoning? The ventilation system bypasses their defensive choke points entirely. We could eliminate the crew deck guards without alerting the others, then work our way up. Classic infiltration tactics, Webb shook his head. Colonial raiders aren't sophisticated enough for coordinated response. Direct assault through main corridors would overwhelm them before they could organize. Sarah felt warning bells in her mind. Webb's tactical assessment was wrong for colonial raiders, but it would be accurate for trained military forces. Was he testing her knowledge, or did he genuinely misunderstand the scenario? We go with Sarah's plan, Vex decided. If she's wrong, we adapt. They accessed the maintenance shafts through a service panel, moving in single file through the cramped spaces. Sarah led the way, her suit's sensors mapping the route while monitoring for hostile movement. Behind her, Webb moved too quietly for someone unfamiliar with this type of infiltration. The ventilation system brought them to the crew deck undetected. Through observation ports, they could see 3 raiders guarding the main corridor. Sarah signaled for a coordinated strike, but as they prepared to move, Webb's position shifted slightly. Wait, Sarah whispered over the comm. Webb, maintain position. Just getting a better angle, he replied. But his movement would put him in position to observe her combat techniques rather than engage the enemy. Crystalline Vex struck first, her energy weapon dropping one raider instantly. Thyvan and Sarah moved simultaneously, eliminating the other two with precise shots. But Sarah noticed Webb's delayed reaction, as if he had been more interested in watching her performance than participating. They proceeded through the ship, systematically neutralizing hostile forces. Sarah's tactical recommendations proved accurate at every turn, while Webb's suggestions consistently favored approaches that would force her to demonstrate advanced combat skills. As they reached the final objective, securing the bridge, Sarah made a decision. Instead of the careful infiltration approach she had been planning, she deliberately chose a more direct assault that would require less specialized technique. Front door approach, she announced. Overwhelming firepower, quick resolution. Webb looked surprised. That's unusually direct for your tactical style. Sometimes simple works best, Sarah replied, but internally she filed away his comment about her tactical style. How could he know her style when they had just met? The simulation concluded successfully, with their team achieving high marks for efficiency and minimal civilian casualties. As they exited the simulation chamber, Professor Kelvac approached with his usual post-exercise evaluation. Excellent coordination, he noted. Miss Chen, your tactical planning was particularly effective. Mr. Webb, interesting to see how quickly you adapted to working with a new team. Webb nodded politely, but Sarah caught him studying her with calculating eyes. Sarah's quite talented for someone without formal military background. Professor Kelvac's four eyes focused intently on both humans. Indeed, talent comes in many forms. Some students surprise us with hidden depths. Later that evening, Sarah conducted a discreet background check on Marcus Webb, using her secure access codes. The results were troubling. Webb's academic records were perfect, but they felt artificial. Too clean, too consistent. His supposed colonial security service had no record of anyone by that name. The Academy's emergency alert system wailed through the corridors at 300 hours, jolting students from sleep with its urgent tones. Sarah rolled out of bed instantly, her training overriding grogginess as she reached for clothes and gear. Around her, other students stumbled through similar routines, but few moved with her practiced efficiency. Emergency drills were routine at the Academy, but something felt different about this one. The alert pattern was wrong, lasting too long and carrying undertones that suggested real urgency rather than scheduled exercise. Sarah's door chimed with an incoming communication. Crystalline Vex's concerned face appeared on the small screen. Sarah, are you seeing the tactical displays? This isn't a drill. Through her room's viewport, Sarah could see unusual activity around the docking stations. Security shuttles moved with purposeful precision, while maintenance crews worked to secure non-essential systems. Whatever was happening, the Academy staff were treating it as a genuine emergency. Meet at the assembly point in 5 minutes, Vex continued. Full gear. Professor Kelvac specifically requested our team for whatever this is. Sarah dressed quickly in combat utilities, automatically checking equipment she technically shouldn't possess. Her cover identity's gear was limited to standard student supplies, but certain items had been smuggled aboard for emergency use. Tonight might qualify as an emergency. The main assembly hall buzzed with confused voices as students gathered in formation. Academy staff moved through the crowd with tense efficiency, organizing teams and distributing mission briefings. Professor Kelvac stood at the central podium, his forearms gesturing rapidly as he coordinated with senior faculty. Attention all students. Professor Kelvac's amplified voice cut through the noise. At 0245 hours, long-range sensors detected an unidentified vessel approaching Academy space. The ship failed to respond to standard communications and has not filed a flight plan with traffic control. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Unidentified vessels in Academy space could mean many things, few of them good. Her mission briefings had warned about possible direct action against the Academy itself. All first-year students will assist in security sweeps of non-essential sections, Professor Kelvac continued. This is not a drill, but there is no immediate danger. You will work in teams under faculty supervision. As teams formed, Sarah noticed Marcus Webb positioning himself near her group. Coincidence seemed increasingly unlikely given his mysterious background and the timing of this emergency. Team assignments, announced Professor Kelvac. Vex, Chen, Thiven, and Webb will sweep sections 7 through 12 of the residential quarters. Professor Yannix will accompany your team. Professor Yannix was a stern Thrak female known for her expertise in counter-infiltration techniques. Having her assigned to their team suggested Academy security took this threat seriously. Their assigned sections included guest quarters, temporary housing for visiting faculty, and storage areas rarely accessed by students. As they moved through dimly lit corridors, Sarah's trained senses remained alert for anything unusual. "What exactly are we looking for?" Thiven asked nervously, his scanner sweeping methodically across each doorway. "Anything that doesn't belong," Professor Yannix replied in her clicking Thrak voice. "Hidden equipment, unauthorized personnel, signs of tampering with security systems." They worked through the first several sections without incident, checking rooms methodically while maintaining proper security protocols. Sarah noticed Webb's technique was flawless, too professional for his claimed background. He moved like someone accustomed to search operations. In Section 10, Thiven's scanner detected an anomaly behind what appeared to be a solid wall panel. "Energy signature here doesn't match building schematics. There's equipment behind this wall that shouldn't exist." Professor Yannix examined the readings with growing concern. "That's a sophisticated communication array. Military grade, not Academy standard." Sarah studied the panel's construction while her teammates ran detailed scans. The installation was recent but expertly concealed. Someone with advanced technical skills and detailed knowledge of Academy security had placed this equipment. "Can we access it without triggering security protocols?" Vex asked. "Not safely," Professor Yannix replied, "but we can trace its signal patterns to determine what it's been transmitting." As Yannix worked on signal analysis, Sarah noticed Webb positioning himself where he could observe both the hidden equipment and her reactions. His attention seemed focused more on her than on the discovery they had made. "Interesting," Professor Yannix said, studying her scanner results. "This array has been transmitting tactical assessments of student capabilities. Detailed files on combat performance, psychological profiles, strategic thinking patterns." Sarah felt cold understanding wash over her. Someone had been studying the students, gathering intelligence on future military officers while they were still in training. The implications were staggering. "Who would want that information?" Thiven asked. "Anyone planning to eliminate promising officers before they became threats," Webb said quietly. "Classic intelligence operation." Professor Yannix's compound eyes fixed on Webb with sudden intensity. "That's a very specific assessment, Mr. Webb. What makes you think in terms of elimination operations?" "Colonial security deals with smugglers and pirates," Webb replied smoothly. "You learn to think like the enemy." But Sarah caught the subtle tell in his voice, the slight hesitation that suggested improvisation rather than truth. Webb knew about elimination operations because he had been involved in them, not because he had defended against them. Their communication devices chimed simultaneously with an urgent message from Academy security. "All teams return to assembly point immediately. Unknown vessel has launched boarding pods toward the station." As they hurried through corridors toward the main section, Sarah's mind raced through tactical possibilities. A coordinated attack combining infiltration assets already aboard the station with external assault forces would be devastatingly effective. The hidden communication array could have provided real-time intelligence to coordinate such an operation. "Sarah," Vex said quietly as they moved, "you're thinking something specific. What is it?" "Two-phase attack," Sarah replied, keeping her voice low. "Gather intelligence through embedded assets, then launch coordinated strike when the intelligence indicated optimal timing." "That's remarkably sophisticated analysis," Webb commented from behind them. "Almost like you've seen this pattern before." Sarah met his gaze directly. "Sometimes obvious patterns are obvious." The assembly hall was chaos when they arrived. Security officers coordinated defensive positions, while faculty organized student teams for various support roles. On the main display, tracking sensors showed 3 small craft approaching the station's docking bays with obvious hostile intent. Professor Kelvac's voice cut through the noise. "Students with advanced tactical training will assist in defensive preparations. Others will secure non-combat areas and ensure civilian evacuation routes remain clear. Team 7, you're assigned to security station. Alpha," announced Professor Yannix, "your discovery of the communication array qualifies you for enhanced responsibilities. Security Station Alpha controlled access to critical academy systems including power distribution, life support, and defensive weapons. Sarah realized this assignment placed their team at the heart of any defense effort, but also made them prime targets if hostile forces had detailed intelligence about academy operations. As they moved toward their assigned positions, Webb fell into step beside Sarah. "You know," he said conversationally, "someone with your tactical insight might be valuable to various organizations. The right connections could lead to interesting opportunities." Sarah kept walking but filed away the comment. Was Webb attempting recruitment, or was he testing her loyalties? Either possibility suggested he knew more about her than her cover identity should have revealed. "I'm just a student," she replied, interested in learning, nothing more. "Of course," Webb said, but his smile carried undertones of shared secrets. Though sometimes the most interesting learning happens outside classrooms. At Security Station Alpha, they found a state-of-the-art command center with real-time tracking of the approaching hostile vessels. The 3 boarding craft were moving too quickly and maneuvering too skillfully to be typical pirates or raiders. This was a military operation. Estimated time to contact 6 minutes, reported the duty officer. All defensive systems are online and tracking targets. Sarah studied the tactical display, noting approach vectors and probable landing sites. The hostile forces were following a textbook assault pattern designed to establish multiple beachheads simultaneously. But something about their timing bothered her. "They're moving too predictably," she murmured, half to herself. "What do you mean?" Vex asked. "Classic multi-point assault, but they're following the pattern exactly. Real special operations would introduce random elements to prevent defensive prediction." Webb was watching her again with that calculating expression. Unless they wanted defenders to predict their moves, feint attacks to draw security away from their real objective. Sarah nodded slowly, then froze as the implication hit her. The real attack isn't the boarding craft. Those are distractions. She turned to the duty officer. "Are there any other vessels in Seoul?" The Academy's defensive systems activated with lethal precision as the true scope of the attack became clear. 8 hostile vessels, not 3, converged on the station from multiple vectors while internal security teams struggled to coordinate responses to threats they hadn't expected. Sarah watched the tactical displays with growing alarm. The attacking forces moved with perfect coordination, suggesting detailed intelligence about Academy defenses and response protocols. Someone had provided them with information that should have been impossible to obtain. "Security breach in Section 4, announced the duty officer. "Hostile forces have gained access to the lower maintenance levels." Professor Yannick's coordinated defense assignments with rapid efficiency. "Team 7, you're reassigned to counter-infiltration." The attackers seemed to know exactly where to strike. As they moved through corridors toward the threatened section, Sarah noticed Webb's confident navigation through areas that should have been unfamiliar to a transfer student. He moved like someone who had studied the Academy's layout extensively. "Marcus," she said casually, "you seem to know your way around pretty well for someone who just arrived." "I studied the station schematics during orientation," Webb replied. Always good to know escape routes, but his route choices suggested knowledge beyond what orientation materials would provide. Webb was leading them through maintenance corridors that didn't appear on standard maps, passages that only security personnel and long-term residents would know. They reached Section 4 to find chaos. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows while automated security systems engaged multiple targets. Through the observation windows, Sarah could see figures in military assault gear moving with professional precision. Corvin Special Forces, Thyvan identified, studying their equipment and tactics. "This isn't a raid. It's a surgical strike." Corvin commandos represented the elite of their military, soldiers who specialized in operations against hardened targets. Their presence confirmed this attack was state-sponsored rather than criminal opportunism. What would Corvin forces want with a military academy? Vex wondered aloud. Sarah knew the answer but couldn't voice it without revealing her own intelligence background. The Corvin Empire had been testing Galactic Defense Force responses across border sectors, probing for weaknesses. Eliminating the next generation of GDF officers before they graduated would cripple military leadership for decades. "Tactical assessment," Professor Yannick's ordered. "How do we stop them?" Sarah studied the hostile movement patterns, identifying their objectives and likely escape routes. The Corvin forces were moving toward the Academy's central computer core, where they could access complete records of every student, faculty member, and research project. They want the databases, she realized. Student records, tactical research, strategic planning files, everything the Academy knows about future GDF capabilities. Webb nodded approvingly. Excellent analysis. The question is how to stop them without getting ourselves killed in the process. As if summoned by his words, explosions echoed through the corridor as Corvin forces breached security barriers just ahead of their position. Professor Yannick's coordinated with Academy security forces, but the attackers had planned for standard defensive responses. We need to outflank them, Sarah said, studying alternative routes on her scanner. If we can access the upper maintenance levels, we could position ourselves above their advance. Too dangerous, Webb countered. Better to fall back and establish defensive positions in prepared areas. Sarah looked at him sharply. Webb's suggestion would allow the Corvin forces to reach their objective, while Academy defenders wasted time in futile rearguard actions. Either he was thinking tactically incorrectly, or he wanted the attackers to succeed. No, she said firmly. The upper levels give us tactical advantage and prevent them from reaching the computer core. Professor Yannick's made the decision. Chen's plan. Move out. They accessed the upper maintenance levels through service lifts emerging into crawl spaces above the main corridors. Through observation ports, they could track Corvin movement below while remaining undetected. Perfect position for ambush, Vex noted, checking her weapon's charge level. Sarah studied the hostile formation, counting 12 commandos moving in textbook tactical sequence. But something about their positioning bothered her. They were maintaining perfect spacing for standard threats, but their formation left them vulnerable to attacks from above. They don't know we're here, she whispered. Their intelligence didn't include information about upper-level access. Webb was studying her again with that calculating expression. You seem very confident about what their intelligence includes or doesn't include. Before Sarah could respond, the lead Corvin commandos reached the junction directly below their position. This was the moment for action, but Sarah hesitated as a terrible possibility occurred to her. What if Webb was feeding information to the attackers in real time? His position would allow him to warn them about the ambush, turning their tactical advantage into a death trap. On my mark, Professor Yannick whispered, preparing to coordinate their strike. Sarah made a split-second decision. Instead of targeting the main force below, she shifted her aim toward Webb while maintaining the appearance of focusing on the hostiles. Now, Professor Yannick commanded. The ambush erupted with precise violence. Energy weapons carved through the narrow space while Corvin commandos scrambled for cover that didn't exist. In seconds, 8 of the 12 attackers were eliminated, but Sarah kept one eye on Webb throughout the engagement. His shooting was too accurate, his target selection too professional. This wasn't colonial security training. This was special operations expertise. The surviving Corvin forces retreated toward their insertion point, carrying wounded comrades and abandoning their mission objectives. Academy security forces moved to secure the area, while medical teams tended to casualties. Excellent work, Professor Yannick commended them. Your tactical coordination prevented a serious intelligence breach. As they made their way back to the security station, Sarah found herself walking beside Webb again. His demeanor had shifted subtly, becoming more watchful and less casually friendly. Impressive shooting back there, he commented. Very precise target selection. Almost like you've done this before. Lucky shots, Sarah replied, but she knew her performance had been too professional to explain away easily. At the security station, they learned the full scope of the attack. All 8 hostile vessels had been driven off, but not before deploying reconnaissance drones throughout Academy space. The Corvin forces had obtained some intelligence, even though their primary objectives had failed. Professor Kelvac addressed the assembled students and faculty with obvious concern. Today's attack represents a new level of threat to this institution. Our enemies are targeting not just our military capabilities, but our future leaders while they're still in training. Sarah listened carefully, but part of her attention remained focused on Webb. During the engagement, she had noticed him using hand signals that weren't part of standard academy training. Someone had taught him military communication protocols that colonial security forces wouldn't typically know. As the briefing concluded, Webb approached her with a different expression than before. The casual friendliness was gone, replaced by professional assessment. "Sarah," he said quietly. "We need to talk privately," she nodded, though every instinct warned her this conversation would be dangerous. They found an empty classroom away from the main activity, and Webb sealed the door behind them. "Drop the act," he said without preamble. "You're not a civilian student any more than I am." Sarah studied his face, looking for tells that might indicate his true allegiances. "I don't know what you mean. Your tactical knowledge, combat skills, and analytical capabilities are far beyond what any civilian could possess. You're either military intelligence or special operations, probably both." Sarah remained silent, neither confirming nor denying his assessment. Webb continued, "The question is whether you're here for the same reason I am, or if we're on opposite sides of this conflict." "And what reason would that be?" Sarah asked carefully. "Counterintelligence. Identifying and eliminating enemy agents who have infiltrated the academy." Webb's expression was serious now, all pretense abandoned. "My name isn't Marcus Webb. I'm Lieutenant Commander Alex Martinez, Galactic Defense Force Special Intelligence Division." Sarah felt relief and apprehension in equal measure. If Martinez was telling the truth, he was an ally. If he was lying, he was an extremely dangerous enemy who had just revealed knowledge of her real mission. "Prove it," she said simply. Martinez reached slowly into his jacket and withdrew a small device. He activated it with his thumb, and Sarah's scanner immediately detected the authentication codes of a GDF intelligence operative. "Your turn," Martinez said, "because someone with your capabilities is either the agent I was sent to work with or the enemy operative I was sent to eliminate." Sarah made her decision. The attack had changed everything, and maintaining cover was less important than stopping whatever larger operation was targeting the academy. She activated her own authentication device. "Agent Sarah Chen, GDF Deep Cover Operations. Codename Nightingale," Martinez smiled with. The secure briefing room deep within the academy's intelligence section felt different from the classrooms Sarah had grown accustomed to. Here real military operations were planned and executed, far from the theoretical exercises that occupied most students' time. Martinez activated privacy screens and counter-surveillance equipment before beginning his briefing. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't officially exist. 3 months ago, GDF intelligence detected unusual patterns in Corvan military preparations." Sarah settled into a chair, her mind already shifting from student mode to operational thinking. "Let me guess. They weren't preparing for territorial expansion or defensive operations?" "Exactly. They were organizing deep strike capabilities specifically designed to target training facilities and educational institutions." Martinez pulled up holographic displays showing force deployments across Corvan space. 12 major academies, 17 research stations, and 34 training facilities across the galaxy. The scope was staggering. Sarah studied the target list, recognizing patterns that suggested systematic planning rather than opportunistic attacks. They're trying to cripple military leadership development before the next generation can mature. That's our assessment. Today's attack was a field test. They wanted to evaluate our defensive capabilities and response protocols. Martinez highlighted specific data points in the holographic display. "The reconnaissance drones they deployed will provide intelligence for much larger operations." Sarah felt cold realization wash over her. "How long do we have?" "Intelligence estimates suggest coordinated strikes within 6 weeks. Possibly sooner if they're satisfied with today's results." The timeline was impossibly short for traditional military responses. Moving fleets and organizing defenses would take months, time they didn't have. But Sarah's training had prepared her for situations where conventional approaches failed. "What about the infiltration assets?" she asked. Today's attack required inside knowledge of academy systems and protocols. Martinez's expression darkened. "That's where things get complicated. We know there are enemy agents embedded throughout the target institutions, but we don't know how many or who they are. Present company excluded. Hopefully. Martinez met her gaze directly. "The original plan was for us to identify infiltrators and eliminate them quietly. But today's attack changes everything. We're not dealing with individual spies anymore. This is preparation for military action." Sarah absorbed the implications while studying the intelligence data. Traditional counter-espionage operations were designed for peacetime conditions, subtle investigations that could take months or years. They needed to accelerate everything, What assets do we have available? She asked. Officially? None. This operation doesn't exist, remember? Martinez manipulated the displays to show Academy personnel files. Unofficially, we have local security forces, faculty members with military backgrounds, and advanced students who can be trusted. Sarah studied the faculty listings, noting several names she recognized from her classes. Professor Kelvac was asking pointed questions about my background weeks before today's attack. He knows more than he's letting on. Kelvac is read into the operation at a compartmentalized level. He knows to watch for suspicious activities, but not about our specific mission. What about Professor Yanix? Her counter-infiltration expertise seems suspiciously relevant. Martinez nodded. Yanix is former GDF intelligence. She's here specifically to provide security consultation. Though most faculty think she's just an academic specialist, the pieces were falling into place, revealing a more complex operation than either of their individual briefings had suggested. Multiple agencies were working parallel missions with limited coordination, a recipe for confusion and potential disaster. We need to consolidate our intelligence and coordinate response efforts, Sarah said. Working separately makes us vulnerable to exactly the kind of systematic attack they're planning. Agreed. But first we need to identify immediate threats within the Academy. Martinez pulled up student files, including detailed psychological profiles and performance assessments. Someone provided the Corvin forces with precise intelligence about Academy systems and defensive capabilities. Sarah studied the files, looking for patterns that might indicate hidden loyalties or suspicious backgrounds. Most students had straightforward military family connections or academic achievement records that explained their presence. What about recent transfers or unusual admission circumstances? She asked. That's where it gets interesting. Martinez highlighted several files. 12 students were admitted through non-standard channels in the past 6 months. Emergency transfers, special circumstance admissions, late applications that were somehow approved despite waiting lists. Sarah recognized several names, including her own cover identity and Martinez's false background, but 10 other students had similar irregular admission patterns that deserved investigation. We start with surveillance and behavioral analysis, she decided. Look for patterns in communication, tactical knowledge that exceeds claimed backgrounds, and social connections that don't fit their supposed histories. A soft chime indicated someone approaching the briefing room. Martinez quickly deactivated the displays and returned security protocols to normal status. Professor Kelvac entered a moment later, his forearms carrying data tablets and what appeared to be classified communication devices. Agent Chen, Lieutenant Commander Martinez, he said formally, acknowledging their real identities. I've been monitoring communications traffic since the attack. We have a problem. Martinez and Sarah exchanged glances. Kelvac's tone suggested complications beyond what they had already discussed. What kind of problem? Martinez asked. 3 students left the academy during the confusion of the attack. They used emergency evacuation protocols to access transport shuttles and departed before security could establish comprehensive departure controls. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Which students? Kelvac consulted his tablet. Forensics, a Zephyrian transfer student from the Outer Rim. Helen Vasquez, human emergency admission after her family's merchant vessel was destroyed by pirates. And Korvac Zen, a Thrak whose application was personally endorsed by a sector governor. All 3 names appeared on Martinez's list of students with irregular admission circumstances. The timing of their departure suggested either guilty knowledge of the attack or participation in its planning. Do we have tracking data on their departure vectors? Sarah asked, limited. They followed standard evacuation routes initially, but all 3 vessels changed course after leaving Academy space. Current locations unknown. Martinez activated his communication equipment and began coordinating with GDF tracking stations. I'll see if we can pick up their trails through long-range sensors. Sarah studied the student files more carefully, looking for connections between the 3 departed students and today's attack. Varen Thix had demonstrated unusual tactical knowledge in recent exercises. Helen Vasquez had asked detailed questions about Academy security systems during orientation. Korvac Zen had access to communication equipment that exceeded standard student allowances. They weren't just students, she realized. They were intelligence operatives conducting preparatory surveillance. Professor Kelvac nodded grimly. That's our assessment as well. The question is how many others are still here. Martinez completed his coordination efforts and turned back to them. I've arranged for discreet surveillance of the remaining students on our suspect list. But we need to be careful. If there are additional enemy agents aboard, they'll be watching for signs of counterintelligence operations. Sarah thought about her classmates, the students she had grown to respect and care about over the past months. The idea that some of them might be enemy agents preparing to participate in attacks on other academies was disturbing, beyond the purely professional implications. What about Crystalline Vex and Thyvan? She asked. They've been working closely with both of us. If there are leaks in our operational security, I've been watching them, Professor Kelvac said. Their backgrounds check out completely, and their behavior patterns don't suggest hidden agendas. I believe they can be trusted. But we can't involve them in operational planning without proper security clearances, Martinez added, for their own protection as much as operational security. Sarah nodded, understanding the dilemma. Vex and Thyvan were intelligent enough to recognize that something unusual was happening, but bringing them into the classified aspects of the situation would place them at risk. We proceed with the assumption that enemy agents are still present, she decided. Full operational security protocols, limited information sharing, and careful surveillance of suspected individuals. Agreed, Martinez said. But we need to accelerate the timeline. If the Corvin forces are planning system-wide attacks within 6 weeks, we need to identify and neutralize their intelligence assets immediately. Professor Kelvac gathered his equipment and prepared to leave. I'll coordinate with Academy Security to establish enhanced monitoring protocols. But remember, we're operating under significant constraints. This is still an educational institution with civilian oversight. After Kelvac left, Sarah and Martinez found themselves alone with the weight of their mission. The scope. The morning after Sarah's revelation brought an unusual calm to the academy. Students attended classes normally while faculty maintained routine schedules. But underneath the surface, intense activity focused on identifying remaining enemy agents before they could complete their missions. Sarah sat in advanced strategic planning class, listening to Professor Kelvac discuss theoretical scenarios, while secretly coordinating real-world operations through discrete signals and coded communications. Her student identity had become the perfect cover for counterintelligence work. Crystalline Vex noticed her distraction during a break between lectures. You've been different since the attack. More focused, but also more distant. What's going on? Just processing everything, Sarah replied carefully. Yesterday changed how I think about academy life. It changed how everyone thinks about academy life, Thyvan added, joining their conversation. We're not just students anymore. We're targets. Sarah studied her friend's expressions, looking for signs of knowledge beyond what their surface conversations suggested. Both seemed genuinely affected by the attack without displaying the calculated responses she would expect from trained operatives. Martinez approached their group with his usual casual demeanor intact. Mind if I join the post-traumatic stress discussion? Yesterday was my first real combat situation. How are you handling it? Vex asked with concern. Better than expected. Turns out all that colonial security training was more applicable than I thought. Sarah caught the subtle emphasis on training and filed it away. Martinez was maintaining his cover identity while providing her with status updates through seemingly normal conversation. As classes resumed, Sarah noticed several subtle changes in academy operations. Security patrols followed different patterns. Communication systems required additional authentication protocols, and faculty members moved with the heightened awareness of people expecting trouble. During tactical simulation exercises, she observed her classmates more carefully than before. Most demonstrated skills consistent with their claimed backgrounds, but 3 students displayed knowledge that seemed inconsistent with their supposed experience levels. Kira Voltan, a Volnari student supposedly from a merchant family, demonstrated advanced sensor operation techniques during a reconnaissance scenario. Her scanner work was too precise, too professional for someone without military training. Jerome Santos, a human transfer student from a frontier agricultural colony, showed intimate familiarity with urban combat tactics during a city fighting simulation. His movement patterns and tactical decisions reflected specialized training in counterinsurgency operations. Most concerning was Elena Rostova, another human student whose application claimed refugee status after her home colony was destroyed. During leadership exercises, she consistently made strategic decisions that prioritized information gathering over mission completion, suggesting intelligence priorities rather than military objectives. Sarah documented her observations through the secure communication channels Martinez had established, building profiles of potential enemy agents while maintaining her cover as an ordinary student. That evening, she met with Martinez and Professor Kelvac in the secure briefing room. Their investigation had produced disturbing results. "We've identified 7 students with suspicious backgrounds and behavioral patterns," Martinez reported. "But the intelligence profiles suggest they're working in coordination, rather than as individual agents, Professor." Kelvac activated holographic displays showing communication patterns between the suspected students. Subtle signals, brief conversations, and coordinated schedule changes that create opportunities for information exchange. Sarah studied the patterns, recognizing the hallmarks of a professional intelligence network. They're preparing for something. The question is whether it's another attack or an intelligence extraction operation. Intelligence extraction seems more likely, Kelvac assessed. Today's classes covered advanced strategic planning concepts that won't be available in standard curricula for another 6 months. Martinez pulled up academy records showing which classified materials had been accessed in recent weeks. 7 faculty members have accessed high-level strategic planning documents. 3 research projects have received unusual attention from student assistants, and library records show pattern researching of military doctrine that extends far beyond course requirements. The scope of the intelligence gathering was impressive and alarming. Enemy agents had systematically accessed information about galactic military planning, strategic doctrine, and advanced tactical concepts that would normally take years to accumulate. They're not just gathering intelligence about academy operations, Sarah realized. They're collecting comprehensive data about future GDF capabilities and strategic thinking, which explains the coordinated attacks being planned, Kelvac added. With this intelligence, Corvan forces could predict and counter GDF responses across multiple conflict scenarios. A priority communication from GDF headquarters interrupted their discussion. Martinez accepted the transmission and activated secure display protocols. Lieutenant Commander Martinez, Agent Chen, the voice belonged to Admiral Rebecca Torres, Director of GDF Intelligence Operations. "You have new mission parameters." Sarah straightened unconsciously. Admiral Torres's involvement meant their operation had escalated to the highest levels of military command. "We've detected similar intelligence networks at 17 other academic institutions," Admiral Torres continued. "Coordinated timing suggests a systematic intelligence extraction, followed by military action against all target locations." The timeline had accelerated dramatically. Sarah felt the pressure of impending action as adrenaline heightened her focus. New orders. Identify and neutralize enemy agents immediately. Authorization is granted for enhanced interrogation and elimination protocols if necessary. Martinez accepted the orders formally, but Sarah noticed Professor Kelvac's concerned expression. Enhanced protocols meant their operation was transitioning from counterintelligence to direct action. "We have 48 hours, Admiral Torres concluded. "After that, assume enemy extraction and prepare for immediate attack." The transmission ended, leaving them alone with the weight of their expanded mission. 48 hours to identify and stop a sophisticated intelligence network that had been developing for months. "We need to force them into action," Sarah said after considering their options. "Create a situation where they have to break cover." "What kind of situation?" Martinez asked. Sarah activated the tactical displays and began outlining a deception operation. "We feed them false intelligence about an imminent GDF fleet movement, something valuable enough that they'll risk exposure to transmit the information. And when they attempt transmission, we track their communication methods and identify their complete network." Kelvac finished, understanding her strategy. "Exactly. But we need bait that's convincing enough to trigger immediate action." Martinez studied the displays thoughtfully. "What about a fake emergency deployment order? If they think the academy is about to be evacuated due to intelligence about imminent attack, they'd need to accelerate their extraction timeline." Sarah nodded. "That could work. But we need to make it convincing enough that they act without giving them time to verify through external sources." They spent the next several hours developing their deception operation, false fleet movement orders, emergency evacuation protocols, and classified intelligence briefings that would make enemy agents believe they needed to extract immediately or lose their intelligence gathering opportunity. Professor, Kelvac would introduce the false intelligence during tomorrow's faculty briefing, ensuring that student assistants and work-study participants would overhear critical details. Martinez would coordinate technical surveillance to track any communication attempts. Sarah would maintain behavioral surveillance of suspected students, while appearing to participate normally in emergency preparations. As they prepared to implement their operation, Sarah felt the familiar tension of approaching action. After months of careful cover maintenance and gradual intelligence gathering, they were about to force a confrontation that would determine whether their mission succeeded or failed. "Remember," she said, as they concluded their planning session, "once we start this, there's no going back. If we're wrong about any of our suspects, we could compromise innocent students. If we're right but fail to contain the situation, we'll alert the entire enemy network." Martinez checked his equipment one final time. "Understood. But if we don't act now, 17 academies and thousands of future officers could be eliminated within weeks." Sarah activated her own operational gear, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility that came with life-or-death missions. Tomorrow would reveal whether months of careful investigation had identified the real threats, or whether enemy agents had been more sophisticated than anyone realized. In 12 hours, the deception operation would begin. In 24 hours, they would know if their intelligence was accurate. In 48 hours, they would either have neutralized the threat or be fighting to